when we first started this project, I sent you a couple Hensel songs, if I remember right. One was a rather late song, and this one is rather early. She was only 20 when she wrote this song. And you picked this one because you loved it most. And you went through this process of recording it with all of the constraints that you mentioned. And it's only through that process, we had a conversation at some point where we started talking about how the constraints you were under made you think about the constraints that Fanny Hensel was under. And I should mention that Fanny Hensel, so she wrote this when she was 20. At this point, she was living with her family in Berlin in the same home that she held her Sunday musical gatherings in, and those were happening even when she was 20. So this piece, when it was performed in 1826, it would have been in her home, in her family's home. And the space it was performed in was not, alas, it was not as small as the space you're in, Nicole. It was quite a bit bigger. It could have seated as many as 150 or 200 people, but it was a domestic space. It was not a concert hall. And she was not writing for concert halls because in so many ways she couldn't write for concert halls. So in going through this process, doing this recording under certain constraints and realizing that this is a piece that would have been written under its own constraints and performed under its own constraints, what kind of epiphanies did you have? What takeaways did you come away with in thinking about her constraints versus your constraints?
Hmm.
That's a big question, but I know it's one that has come up in our conversations.
I could say something to begin with.
Sure.
I don't know, Stephen, whether it will answer the wider set of questions, but I I think I think what I've found preparing this piece in this space, uh, it um, it challenged my notions of performing the piece to someone because there was no one here. So I felt this sort of urge or this desire and a certain sort of default to sort of switching on a performance sort of I don't know approach to the piece, but there was nothing responding to me. You know that both in terms of the environment and in terms of an audience, whether it was perceived or whether they were live, or I just it felt like I was in some sort of vacuum, but I was expected to present. And so I guess it's an interesting concept because when we think about performance, when we think about contemporary performance, we don't often think about performance in the home, where the spaces arguably are more intimate, and the way in which we relate, as performer and audience, I think has a different nuance, has a different sort of color and face to it. So yeah, I just I found it difficult to evaluate as I was playing it. What am I supposed to do in terms of performing this? Who am I performing to? And what sort of gestures that I would normally have in my toolbox to present this work, are they even relevant? And there's sort of this dialogue going through my head as I was recording it and performing it. And I just wonder whether, in the end, going through that, we have, created a certain sort of environment for ourselves as performers where we're, you know, I don't know, accounting for certain sorts of expectations that have been put in place over a variety of different years in a variety of different contexts that we may not need, because in this space where everything feels just so stripped back and intimate, it still works, and it's still performance, and perhaps arguably it becomes performance not in a grand sense, but more in a true sense of communication, because the space in which the conversation, the message travels is smaller, and so it feels like you don't have to sort of rely on the grand gesture. You can be more, I don't know, sort of economic and more contained, but actually also that there's a sense of grace and poise about that. So it's a bit of a stream of consciousness, but I think I learned the power of economy in terms of performance by doing this, and the beauty of economy. And
Such a beautiful way to put it. Veritza, how would you respond to that big question?
Well, the issue of space that Nicole says is the main one, that we were not, that we are not used to performing, or most of us are not used to, or at least taught and expected to perform in a private space. We learn, practice, and gear our performances for the public and in a public space. So we of course we sing at home and play at home. We practice. We rehearse in the small rooms at a college or in a theater. It's not an issue, but these are not performances. This is a performance in a small private space with no audience, which is very different to recording a remote performance, social distance, or the without audience in a big proper hall. We would feel very differently if we recorded this in a concert hall on our own, because it's a setting, it's a space that is dedicated to that, or that at least we are used to performing. I felt as if we were redomesticating the song for the digital age, and finding a new way to perform song, first for us, because I felt that I was performing to myself, and what Nicole said nicely about economy and about thinking, all the technical constraints aside, how do I angle the camera so that not all the boxes or CD stands and TV are in the frame, or what kind of a persona should I assume in a private space? Should I dress up? Should I be in leggings? It's a caricature now, but it's what kind of performance are we putting? And then looking at yourself. We don't perform to a mirror. Here we are, at least I had to perform to a camera. So it's a very different feeling. Makes you feel so much more conscious about what you're doing on the stage, in performance. And it affects the choice, or the toning down of gestures that Nicole was saying. Even the volume and the expression and the all the gestures that you may normally resort to by default are not the right for the space. But it felt very intimate, and it felt, once I got used to the idea, it felt very nice and more communicative in a way than it did at the beginning. I think it made me think a lot about me and the song, me and the audience, me and the performance, me and the pianist, and just re-question all of those relationships while performing in my home space, in my private space, but for people outside.
My brain is buzzing with so many thoughts from what you just said, from what both of you just said. I love the idea of re-domesticating this song for the digital age. And it makes me think that, of course, so much music in the 19th century, especially music written by women, but not only music written by women, was performed in private spaces, or even like semi-public spaces, you know, where Hensel was performing her music. 200 people is a lot of people, but it's still really a private space. It's not for a public audience. And she was not writing for a public audience, and so many women weren't. And there have been calls to perform some of these pieces in a way that's more in keeping with the way they would have been performed in 1826. And lo and behold, we have come up with a way to do that because of the crazy constraints of COVID. So that's the first thought, that this weird platform with all of its challenges in some paradoxical way provides an even more effective means of recreating the domestic spaces of the 19th century. The second thought that comes to mind, Nicole, when you were talking about, you said you felt you were in a vacuum, that you're performing for no one, for no public audience, and Veritza, you were saying the same thing. I can't help but think that Fanny Hensel herself, she did not write music for a large audience. For a large public audience, she only started publishing her music in the last year of her life. And there are letters and diary entries where she says, at one point she says basically, if there's no public for your work, at some point you lose motivation and energy and will to continue to create work. In another letter, she's writing about her own letters, and she says, who among my family and friends will read these things after I'm gone? And it's hard not to read that and think that she's also talking about her musical creation. So she was well aware that she was in her own vacuum of sorts and could not reach beyond the closed sphere that she was in, just as you both had a similar experience in recreating this piece. So the connections are multifarious, and I have to confess, I would have never imagined that so many of them would have emerged over the course of this recording project.
Definitely, definitely.
I wonder if, as a wrap up, do you have any final thoughts about this song or about your experience creating this song? We've touched on so many different topics that are really rich and interesting, but are there any other takeaways that you have that we haven't touched on? Maybe each of you could offer one of those before we close.
Well, it certainly made me fall in love with song again, song in general, not preparing the song for public consumption. I mean, this is the public performance in the end and intended for performance, but not making it for the stage, made it a more inward and intimate process and introspective. And it really made me think much more about beauty of the text, beauty of the song, two together, me thinking about the song, whether it's just because I had more time or because it was the circumstances, but it certainly made me fall in love with the song and rethink what I would be doing with a song when I hopefully one day go back to performing in public. So I was very grateful for the process.
Nicole?
Well, I mean, it was such a joy to learn this song and to record it with Veritza. And I guess my takeaway was that I have learned something about myself that I never knew, actually. So it's been an important journey for me, even though it was quite a small one. And that is that there is a power and a beauty in something that at first may seem overly revealing and you know, creating a sense of one being vulnerable, but actually if you can break through that, that you know, that there's a certain sort of, I don't know, authority and yes, and beauty in a more bare, simple, but not simple in terms of, you know, facile, but simple as in just, you know, more naked. It's like a naked rendering of song, and you know, for me it felt like it was at the heart of communication, and it was at the heart of relationship, actually. And it also made me think about the role of art song moving forward, especially in this sort of post-COVID world that we're moving into. And you know, we, you know, as a global community, we've been brought back out of necessity into more intimate spaces. And I think that art song can, and I suspect will, play a more and more important role as we come out of this period, because I think it offers the opportunity to continue this sort of intimate dialogue and relationship that I think people have been sort of moving into out of necessity, because we've been losing in a lot of ways the ability to communicate and to relate in larger spaces. So I think it could be you know, a musical form of our time, more than what it has been, and that would excite me. So.
And me as well. You use the words dialogue and relationship, and I'll say that it's been such a joy for me to be involved in this dialogue across an ocean and to see and then hear this piece recreated, brought to life. It's been really meaningful to me, and I'm really grateful to both of you for taking on the project, and I look forward to doing more of them. So thank you.
Thank you so much, Stephen. Thank you, Beritza.
Thank you, Nicole. It was a pleasure.